So we've got this epidemic of female burnout because we're trying to do everything. And then we've got this corresponding epidemic of male depression and disenfranchisement because there are scores of men feeling like they don't have a purpose anymore. We women are saying, we actually don't need you. We can do everything that you can do. And I think there's a space for a new wave of feminism that really honours the differences between men and women and listens to what men need as well, because we've actually come so far. I think for us to keep blindly pressing ahead with our blinkers on, arguing that men are the problem, we're not reading the room. And that's what's happened with this election. The left woke feminist brigade completely failed to read the room. I'm Madeline Eliza. Join me to explore female power, embodied leadership, sensuality and spirituality as we weave together ancient and modern, the scientific and the mythic, the erotic and the divine. Hello, welcome back to season 2 of the Madeline Eliza Show. I'm really excited to have you with me today, and we are coming in hot with my hot take on the Trump presidential landslide election win and what it means for woke feminism. And I'm going to preface this episode by saying I am not a political commentator. I am not a pro-Trump advocate. I am someone who has been on the sidelines of this election. I don't live in the US. I didn't vote in this election. I didn't actually follow the politics incredibly closely this year, but I'm really interested in Trump as a lightning rod for where we're at with relations between men and women, and as a bit of an indicator, like a litmus test of where feminism is at, because I think this screaming victory that he's had in this election really brings a lot of things to light that have been simmering under the surface and that I've been speaking about for some time now in terms of where feminism has failed and what it's actually giving rise to. So I'm not here to speak about politics. I'm not here to advocate for Trump. I'm here to offer some commentary on what I see are the cultural movements that are happening beneath the surface that have contributed to this election win, and why I think we need to listen and pay attention and not get into this kind of righteous hysteria that has been everywhere in the left in the wake of Trump's election win. It goes without saying, I'm a feminist. I believe in women's bodily autonomy. Of course, I feel like that goes without saying. I'm a massive advocate for women occupying all of their power and fully self-actualizing themselves and living in a world of equality and safety and freedom. I'm also the mother of a son. I'm the daughter of a father. I'm sister to a brother. I am friend to many, many beautiful men in my life who I love and care about. And I see the strength of men and the masculine, and I also see the vulnerability and the fragility that's there. Just like women have vulnerabilities, men do as well. And we are not the same. And I think that has been one of the failings of feminism. And I just wanted to take some time in this episode to unpack this, because I think Trump's second election win in the face of everything that he was up against legally and culturally and across the board, it's really an indicator like there's something beneath the surface here for us to look at. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. And I want to start by telling you a story about a first date that I was on some months ago now. And I was on this date with a beautiful, intelligent, conscious, healthy masculine man who had reverence for the feminine and was doing all the work. And we were talking about work, I think, and I shared that I'd spent a lot of time working with alpha males and how that kind of impacted my views on gender relations. And he said, I think we've all had enough of alpha males, haven't we? And it was coming from a place of respect for me and compassion and allyship, like this allyship with women. And I smiled and nodded. It was a first date. But inside, I noticed this response in my body, which I really had to unpack afterwards. And it felt like my ovaries recoiled when he said that. And this wild, feminine, core, true voice in me was saying, whoa, whoa, whoa there, mister. Like, speak for yourself. You might have had enough of alpha males, but I certainly haven't. I love alpha males. I'll only date alpha males. Please don't take the alpha males away. Please don't make the alpha males wrong. And I found this really interesting, and I think that it speaks to something rotten at the heart of feminism when we are often asking men to be less masculine. We are saying your masculinity is toxic, put it away. Healthy masculine strength and power is amazing. I feel like bring it, like show me what you've got. Please don't put it away. And I think this request that women have been making of men to subdue their strength, and there's a lot of talk in the manosphere, which I'll get into, about men being castrated. And I can see why men might feel that way. And this is not about me hating on feminists, but I want to just poke at this truth underneath it all, which is if you read any erotic novel written for women, look at the success of 50 Shades of Grey. The men in these fictional fantasies most often are not weedy, soft, latte-sipping hipsters riding a scooter. They're burly, gruff, masculine men in their full masculine power. And I think Trump's victory speaks to this undercurrent that we have asked men to put their masculinity away, and it's not good for men, and it's actually not good for women either. So I just wanted to share that story and my own instinctual bodily response to this idea that we've had enough of alpha males and we just need alpha males to go away. My response was like, no, please don't. So I guess I share that as encouragement to the men out there wondering if there's any place for their masculinity. Like, your masculinity is not inherently toxic. And I offer that also to women to question maybe if you get swept up in this like woke feminist world that's asking men and women to be the same and asking men to be less masculine so that women can have more power. I just ask you to like look at the impulses that are underneath that and what you're really craving from the masculine, because I bet it's not like soft feminine energy. I'm going to leave that story there. This election has been described as the girls versus boys election. I'm going to pop a whole bunch of links in the show notes to different articles and other commentary that's been written on this, different statistics about how Trump fared with different demographics. I'm going to be referencing a whole bunch of stuff in this episode, and all the links are there if you want to go and fact check. It's all pretty widely reported and agreed upon now anyway. But it's been described as the girls versus boys election. It has also been described as a victory of the manosphere. And the manosphere is like this realm of podcasters and YouTubers of men speaking to men about masculinity. And at the extreme kind of unhealthy end of that, you have the Andrew Tates of this world, who is breeding misogyny and isn't offering a healthy kind of perspective on masculinity at all. But within that manosphere, there's also a lot of men who are saying to the woke left feminists, like, stop telling us to put our masculinity away. And I think that's valid. So the big platform for Harris in this election, and again, I'm not going to get deeply into politics here, that's not the purpose of this conversation, but I just, in like elucidating this idea of girls versus boys, there's been a lot of platform around bodily autonomy for women. The whole abortion issue is massive. Of course, I believe women should have the rights to do what they want with their own bodies. I've had an abortion, just like many of us. I don't for a second think that those rights should be revoked. I'm offering some cultural commentary on why Trump appealed, rather than saying that I think the right thing happened or he should have won or Harris should have won. Like, that's not what this conversation is about. Another big part of her platform was around DEI and diversity and equality and trans rights and that whole bundle of issues, which is really about raising up diversity groups to parity and equality with white men who have historically been the group with the most rights and the group who have subjugated others to the most aggressive degrees. And there's a fabulous article, I'm going to link it in the show notes here, which really points out that, in fact, over the last 50 years, huge advances have been made in women's rights. In the US now, massively more girls, I think almost twice the number of girls than boys are graduating college. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. As I said, you can check all the stats. Meanwhile, 4 times more men than women commit suicide. We're in an epidemic of female burnout. We know that the stats for burnout for working women are exponentially higher than for men, and that really became clear during the COVID years and has continued since then in this new era of working from home and women trying to do it all. So we have this epidemic of female burnout and a corresponding epidemic of male depression, especially in young men. There's this phenomenon of the angry white man. There's a great book by Michael Kimmel that I'm going to pop in the show notes. And he actually wrote this book before Trump rose to power, but he wrote about this group of men, this demographic of angry white men who in the industrial age had been at the top of the food chain, had had purpose, had been able to be of service and provide for their families. And as we've shifted into this information age, it's left a lot of men, and women have risen. Like feminism has really helped women to rise and take on more positions of authority, even though there's not parity. And I'll get to that in a moment in terms of the gender pay gap. But just to stick with this concept of angry white men, this is the demographic that it was there, like this simmering, like a bomb that was about to go off. And Donald Trump came along and lit the fuse. And here finally was a leader for this very disenfranchised group of the population. And he talks about this theme of aggrieved entitlement, which is where a group of people feel entitled to something and they're angry that they don't have it anymore. And this is really this phenomenon that we're seeing with mostly young men. And there's real depression here and real mental health issues and a real sense of disconnection and of men not being sure where they fit anymore in a world where women have come through and we've said since the 80s, even before that, we can do it all. We want to be able to do everything that men can do. And there's a beautiful quote, I'm not sure who it's from, I'll see if I can find the original source, but it says that women, like women of my generation now, we are doing all the work that our grandmothers did in the home, and we are doing all the work that our grandfathers did out in the workforce. And there's been so much commentary about this from the woman's perspective. And I have firsthand lived experience of this, especially as a single mother. And I don't really like to call myself a single mother because I have an amazing co-parent who's very heavily involved in my children's lives. And I do have time to myself as well when my children are with their father. But in the domain of my home, I'm a single parent. I am responsible 100% financially, 100% pragmatically. Yard work completely overwhelms me 95% of the time. It's a lot. Like, it's really a lot to carry, and it's exhausting, and it asks us to be in this very masculine operating system a lot of the time. And I don't think that it serves women. There's another great book I'll pop in the show notes called The Wife Drought by Annabelle Crabb, which came out a few years ago, which really speaks to this phenomenon of women trying and failing to do it all. And that book was really an argument for men to step up in the domestic realms. And there's a lot of great points in there. But if we look at the fundamentals of the masculine and feminine, the greatest desire of the feminine is to feel safe. And the greatest desire of the masculine is to be of service. And these two desires are beautifully complementary to each other. And when we have risen as strong, hyper-independent feminist women, saying we can do it all, we want to be at the top of the corporate ladder and managing our homes and caring for our children, because that biological urge is very hard to switch off, even if you are a female breadwinner. I have walked in those shoes as well, of being the breadwinner with a husband, my husband doing the childcare, the majority of the childcare. I worked full time, and we're overriding our biological urge to be with our children when they're very small. My son was under 2 years old, and I was out working full time, and it was really hard on my body and on my heart because I yearned to be with my baby. So this is my subjective experience, but there's broader trends at play here of women saying we can do it all. We're going to do everything that men can do. We've tried to do it all. We've got this epidemic of female burnout, which has been widely reported on and spoken about. There's been so much commentary and analysis of this epidemic of female burnout. But in that, we've forgotten about men. And we've stayed in this kind of victim mode of looking at the ways that men have subjugated women, the ways that men have oppressed women, the ways that it has been unfair in the past. And there's still, sure, a lot of systemic issues at play. If we look at fourth wave feminism, which is kind of what we're in now, I'm excited about the birth of fifth wave feminism. That's why I keep talking about these things, because I can feel a new movement with more balance and more respect for men and women starting to emerge. And I'm excited to be a part of that. Fourth wave feminism started around 2010, 2011. And this is where we've seen, this is like when feminism went online onto social media. This is where the Me Too movement has unfolded. This is where this focus on diversity and equality for different demographics has really come to the fore. This conversation around intersectionality, that term was actually coined in the 90s, but it's been really a big part of this current wave of feminism that we're in. And there's still a lot of issues, and there's still a lot of areas where women are subjected to male violence, sexual assault. There's still a gender pay gap, which I think is an interesting concept, because there's some research that shows actually statistically, if a man and a woman are in the same job, there's not a very big gap in pay anymore. But the thing is that women are choosing different career paths than men from the start. And then women are dropping back when we have children because of the biological urge that we have to care for our young. I'm a mother, and I could not go back to working the way that I did before I had children, when I would work 60, 70 hours a week. I was completely devoted to the visions that we were birthing in the businesses that I was working with. And there's not space for me to do that at the same level of intensity now that I'm a mother. I don't want to. And this is why I think mostly we see less women in those top C-level roles, because once you're into your 30s and your 40s and your 50s and you've got children, when your career really starts to advance, it takes a lot. You need a lot of support at home to be able to hold the weight of a big top-level position like that. That's just the reality of it. So, yeah, gender pay gap is an interesting conversation, I think. But to get back to this idea that we've kind of forgotten men in the conversation. So we've got this epidemic of female burnout because we're trying to do everything. And then we've got this corresponding epidemic of male depression and disenfranchisement, because there are scores of men feeling like they don't have a purpose anymore. We women are saying, we actually don't need you. We can do everything that you can do. Men and women are equal. And we are equal, and we deserve to have equal respect and equal rights, but we are fundamentally different as well. And I think there's a space for a new wave of feminism that really honors the differences between men and women and listens to what men need as well, because we've actually come so far and we've advanced so far that I think for us to keep blindly pressing ahead with our blinkers on, arguing that men are the problem, we're not reading the room. And that's what's happened with this election. The left woke feminist brigade completely failed to read the room. And I believe that Trump's election victory is a massive clapback to the woke left feminist who's going ahead with the blinkers on saying, oh, but it's so unfair, there's so much inequality and men are the problem, blah, 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 blah. Well, men are going, what about us? You can't just forget about us. You can't just ride over us and keep telling us that we're the problem. Men are not actually the problem in this situation. I would say the system is the problem. I want to dismantle patriarchy as much as the next girl. But patriarchy and masculinity are not the same thing. And I've said this before, but I keep repeating it because it's so important and it feels so ingrained in our brains often that you hear the word masculinity and you get this idea of toxic. Like masculinity is toxic masculinity. No. patriarchy is a form of toxic masculinity, but masculinity in itself is not inherently toxic. And I think it's very interesting the way that this election has unfolded, where the left has just kind of ignored this huge cultural shift that's happening, and they've been toppled. And the level of hysteria and panic, particularly in the first few days and week after that election, I found really eye-opening, and it's prompted me to actually speak on this topic, because I just think we've got our heads in the sand. I saw an interview, like a little reel clip from a podcast interview with a very quite well-known, highly regarded young feminist interviewing another young feminist. And the clip opened with the guest saying, "At this point, I really believe that if you voted for Trump, you're either stupid or you're a really bad person." And this seems to be a pretty standard response from the left. And I think there's more unpacking happening now. People going, oh, okay, maybe we actually need to listen and try and work out why. Like, what did we miss here? What were we blind to? But in the immediate aftermath of the election, it was like this shock and hysteria and this panic and this almost blaming of the American people, like, oh my God, you guys must be so stupid, or you must be so homophobic, or you must be so racist, or you must be so misogynistic. All of you, you're just these nasty, horrible little people. And it just strikes me as the absolute height of arrogance to sit up on your high horse with your blinkers on, completely ignoring what the majority of people are saying. And I talk a lot about leadership because I'm a leader and I've been working in leadership roles for over a decade. And the best thing that you can do as a leader is to listen. If you're standing up on your high horse telling people what you think of them and what they should do, guess what? They're not going to follow you. They're not going to buy into what you've got to say because you're disconnected. And I believe the left in the US, and there's similar trends that happen here in Australia as well and around the world, but there's a disconnect from the people. And that's, I think, what has driven this massive sweeping election victory. And I think the best thing that we could do is try to listen and try to understand with compassion and with respect for our fellow human beings, because it's all very well to talk about unity and to talk about healing the planet and healing humanity. But if you're sitting in a very self-righteous position where you're making yourself right and a whole other group of people wrong, there's no space for healing to occur there. It's the same as in intimate relationships. If you're making someone else wrong, it's very hard to move forward. There's a couple of other thinkers I want to reference here. One is Richard Reeves, who coined the term cultural redundancy for this sense of disaffect that men are feeling, this sense that I'm redundant. Not all men, but particularly this demographic of angry white men, like the center base of the Trump voters and supporters. There's a sense of cultural redundancy, like what is my place and where do I belong? And when particularly these groups of young men, and there's been lots written about this, but when they feel like they don't belong or they don't have a purpose anymore, if there's extremist groups that come along and offer a very strong sense of purpose, this is where Andrew Tate and his like come to the fore. This is where other religious extremism, it's the same demographic of young men who feel like they don't belong and they don't have a purpose. And there's depression there because we want to belong and we want to be of service, especially if you're in a masculine mode of operating. Like that's the main driving force. There's also a great interview with Professor Scott Galloway, who speaks about the way that Trump appeals to young men. And he talks about aspirational masculinity. And it's this return to this like alpha machismo, like old school, strong masculine way of being, which I am not saying Trump is a pillar of masculinity that we should all be looking up to. The guy is incredibly problematic in lots of ways. And as I said, I'm not a pro-Trump advocate. I just think it's a very interesting cultural moment that we're in. So this idea of aspirational masculinity, I think, is very current and very interesting for us to examine further. And we know that Trump just didn't just appeal to young men either. He also appealed young white men, which has been that traditional base of his voting supporters. But he also appealed to women. He had upswings with women. He had upswings with Hispanic voters and other racial groups other than just that demographic of white men. So it's not just angry white young men who are looking to Trump as a savior. There's a broader cultural movement towards this strong, old school, alpha, machismo form of masculinity. And I think if you're a feminist, you would do well to pay attention to that, because the model of feminism that we're in is not working for everybody, and it's not actually creating, it's not fostering goodwill between the genders all of the time. There's this dark kind of toxic feminine side of feminism that is hanging out in victim mode and making men wrong and asking men to be small and soft and weaker and more feminine in order to make us feel safe and comfortable. And I think what this election has shown is that there is a massive group of people who are craving that sense of like a strong alpha male leader. And I think it's a very, very interesting moment. I spoke before about, erotic fiction and female erotica written and created for women in general is often based around this concept of the alpha male, because often that's what we crave. And I think that's like the proof in the pudding of where feminism has gone wrong. If we're asking men to suppress their masculinity and to be less masculine to make us feel safe, but we're secretly craving it, then it's out of balance, and we need to have a reckoning, and we need to reform a new model of feminism that continues to rectify the violence and the oppression that women face in many different ways in so many different places around the world, but that also acknowledges, okay, maybe if we're cooking a recipe of gender equality, we've maybe gone a bit too heavy on the turmeric, something where we've put men into a place where a lot of men are really uncomfortable and they've clapped back and they're saying no more. And as I was saying with the demographics that voted for Trump, it's not just men who are craving this kind of the stability that comes with the strong masculine. It's women and it's non-white voting demographics as well. So I think it's a very interesting moment. There's been a lot of talk about Trump's tagline, "Make America Great Again." It kind of harkens to this return to 1950s values. And there's this parallel concept of the trad wife, which is like the 50s version of femininity, where the woman is in the home, provided for and protected by her husband, and her focus is on the home and the family. And it's the polar opposite to the concept of the girl boss who's out there just nailing it in the corporate world and holding her own with the men. So I think it's interesting that there's this yearning to return to like an older time when men were men and women were women. And there's a looking for a strong masculine leader. This is the genius of Donald Trump. And I don't use that word lightly. Like, this man has bounced back from, I would never have imagined that he would be elected again. And this is the shock on the left. It's like, how is this possible? But he is a lightning rod for this cultural moment that we're in, where so many people are feeling lost and feeling frightened. We're in this stage of like late stage capitalism where it feels like the world is tilting on its axis, and we've got all of these compounding crises. We've got AI rapidly escalating. None of us really know exactly how the next 20 to 50 years are going to pan out. And there's like a clutching for stability and ground in that. And I think that's part of the appeal of Trump. And I think that's part of what is beautiful about masculinity. And I'm not, again, holding up Donald Trump as a paragon of masculinity. But I think with feminism saying that we can do everything that men can do and almost making men redundant, We're discrediting some of the beautiful gifts of the masculine, which are strength and stability. Like, this is what the masculine offers the feminine. This is what a male masculine identified partner can offer a female feminine identified partner. This is what we can offer ourselves internally with our own internal masculine and feminine. This is why I talk about polarity so much, because the masculine and the feminine have different gifts and different things to offer. And part of the problem with feminism is that we have discredited the gifts of the masculine. And one of the primary gifts is strength and stability and protection. And when there is a strong masculine leader, even if he's incredibly problematic and in some ways very toxic, it speaks to the part of us that is feeling fearful and uncertain and craving stability. And this is a huge cultural thing that is happening right now that I think we're very foolish to ignore, to just put our heads in the sand and say, well, anyone who voted for him must be crazy. No, there's something deeper under the surface that I think it's interesting to look at. And I remember when Trump was in power last time, and we saw photos of him with Kim Jong-un and with Vladimir Putin, and it was a bit of a joke, like, oh, all these toxic bros just hanging out. But I can see, and this is part of the argument of the right, is that if we've got these psychopathic dictators in power, then the US needs to have a leader who they can relate to and respect. And in a way, Trump being buddies with them, like, well, that's a form of good diplomacy, I guess. I've just been reappraising that, looking back, going, it's interesting how we all looked at that as a joke, but I can see for this demographic of people who have voted for Trump, it's very appealing to have like a strong man at the helm who can manage these crazies that are out there. And the degree to which Donald Trump effectively manages international relations is not the topic of this podcast. I'm not advocating for Trump. I've said that about 1,400 times because I just don't want to be misconstrued here. I really think it's an interesting opportunity to look beneath the surface. I think it's an opportunity to reappraise where feminism is at and to sit humbly in silence and listen to what the people are saying, because the people have spoken loud and clear. And the left has two choices now. And one path is to keep going with the blinkers on the same path that we've been on for the last several years, making everybody who doesn't agree with us wrong, or to actually listen and to have a reckoning and to allow a new generation of feminism to emerge that does not make men wrong, that does not ask men to be smaller or to be less masculine in order to make room for us to thrive and to feel safe as women. A new generation of feminism that actually honors the beautiful gifts that the masculine and the feminine each uniquely bring. And this new generation of feminism is not about returning to 1950s values. I'm not trying to argue that women should all just go back to the kitchen and be happy there. Not at all. But we need to really look at where we're at in terms of our burnout and how we've failed at trying to do it all. We've learned that our bodies just can't do it all at the same time. And also to look at, if we're making men culturally redundant, there's something out of balance here. Food for thought. I'm going to finish this episode with a paraphrasing of the great poet Rumi. Somewhere beyond ideals of the girl boss and the trad wife, there is a field. I'll meet you there. It's time for a new era. And I'm quite excited actually about the way that this election has shone a light on these big cultural shifts that have been happening and like brewing under the surface. It feels like it's all erupted and it has to be reckoned with now because nobody can ignore it anymore. So that's my take. If you want to follow along with me, I do have a mailing list which you can sign up for on my website, madelineeliza.com, and I share more long-form writing and thinking there, subscriber-only special offers, trainings, guided meditations, that kind of thing. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love you to share it with your friends. Great if you can spread the word. if you have time to rate and review the show, that really helps it to get out there to more people. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.